We're talking about the implications of the Copenhagen summit, not in the grand international sense, but locally, what it means for the progress towards a low-carbon economy. I want to turn immediately to you, Mark Clare, Group Chief Executive of Barratt Developments. A lot of people in the business, building homes, providing things to go in new houses, will be saying, well, look, this is all very well. We may even buy into the idea of, a perfect new environment. But there's a recession on. We're in trouble. Demand is falling. It's tough out there. What do you say to them?
We've got to find solutions that don't cost anymore. Now, that may be impossible today. Well, I think we have to look at technology going in the future. I mean, photovoltaics, for example, very expensive, passive way of delivering energy. What if they drop by a factor of 10 over the next 5 years? And the other one is to look at community solutions rather than house-by-house solutions. It's much, much lower cost. So I think the industry's got to take a big step back and say, what's the most efficient way of delivering this? Let's get the cost as low as it can be, and then the customer will be able to save the energy that pays for that extra cost.
We're talking here, Sanand Prasad, about a change of culture.
I take a lot of optimism from the fact that the industry has had many changes of culture over its several thousand-year history. We're talking about construction, making dwellings, making cities, making homes, and there's a huge amount, by the way, to learn from the past in terms of our future cities. I have every confidence that if we had an active market which put new values on money as opposed to carbon, but actually also realized that climate change was a cash flow problem, because in the long run, it will bring returns, cash returns. It's good for the balance sheet and it's good for P&L in the long term. If we triggered that market, we'd be able to innovate in energy production, we'll be able to innovate in efficiencies, using less energy, and actually people will themselves innovate in the way they live their lives without being told how to do it.
In other words, Keith Clark from Atkins, a market that works.
How
do you get from here to there?
It makes the market more perfect. Let's just look forward. To have time value of journeys valued the way they are in a low carbon world is absurd. So we should not be looking at 450 kph trains. We should be looking at 380. We should be looking at motorways that work at 60, not at 70 miles an hour. Because A is more efficient, B, it saves a lot of capital work, it makes it safer, it increases capacity, and it saves massive amount of energy. So I'm with Sanad, there's a huge number of things which are congruent on this. Energy security, all sorts of things.
But how do you do that without a big brother telling you that this is what must be done at Graceford? Because it has to be done by consent, as you've been saying to us. It has to be done in a way which convinces people that there are advantages for them in this, that this is not a hair-shirt world.
Absolutely, and unless we do come up with solutions that the public see work, they are attractive and they make it possible for people to live a pleasant lifestyle, then we've got no hope at all. People will not go and live in hair shirts in environments that frankly are unrealistic.
What you're saying is what really matters in terms of getting our low carbon world going, if that's what is a good idea. They've got to think at home and they've got to be persuaded that that's where it's happening.
It's scalability. It's going from the leading edge, which is seen as a bit way out and not for me, it's only for the enthusiast, to something which is acceptable for the mass market.
So what, from a house builder's point of view, should be the objective in the low carbon target?
Well, we've clearly got a legal target already. I mean, what we're working on more than anything else is how do we bring that new innovation in to reduce the cost of delivery. That is the most important thing. I mean, the point about communities is a good one. We're just started at Hannam Hall, which is a 200-unit zero-carbon community. It's got greenhouses, it's got allotments, it's got open areas. We're actually saying this is a really nice place to live, and by the way, it's zero carbon and your energy bills will be low. I think it starts with how much can I save? We've done a lot of research like others, and it's very clear they want to know how much can I save. But that will change over time. We've seen it in many different areas where the consumer gets it.
They adapt.
And I think that will happen over the next 5 to 10 years. But we've got to kickstart that by saying we can provide a solution that works and is cost effective.
But the interesting thing about that, Keith Clark, is that we come back to a paradox we've mentioned before, that perhaps at a moment of financial stringency, for families, for individuals, that might be just the moment when they are willing not to be more conservative with a small c about these matters, but to think imaginatively, to try to break out.
I think that's right, although at the personal level it's very difficult to take a long-term view when you think you're going to lose your job. I mean, that's always, and that's where we are with many people in most countries at the moment. However, for companies and institutions and governments and responsible professionals looking ahead of tomorrow, we have a different role. We've always had a different role, and that's planning for a world where you are rationing carbon, because that's what it's about. It's about decarb. It is rationing and limiting that in a way which is going to cause some distress to some people and some changes, and that must be the case. Otherwise, the market would have done it already.
And we mustn't forget that 26% of our CO2 emissions comes from domestic stock, but rather more than that comes from the rest of the built environment and
including
the use of
government
cities,
offices,
including government offices. And there's an enormous scope in our major built infrastructure for retrofitting that, and there's actually very little excuse not to do that.
And the way we evaluate it, the way we define it, is huge changes.
Huge changes, but also that stock is much more susceptible to measurement, to transparency, to tracking whether the performance are real or not. And there are people, I think, who would rather put their money in energy efficiency measures that will pay more returns than putting your money in a bank.
There's an important lesson here about post-occupancy evaluation. We've not been as good as we should be at evaluating how buildings work in practice and bottoming out what are the reasons. Is it technical? Is it to do with the way that people use the building? Is it to do with other external influences and factors?
Of course, there's another challenge, isn't there? If a low-carbon community of the sort that you're talking about is a good thing, what you've got to be able to do is to tell people what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like,
You've still got to
what it's going to be like going to work.
You still want to get on a train and go through a station that celebrates the fact you're going there.
Well, that's a terribly important point, isn't it?
Let's be clear. All the things of being, having a health and safety environment where people can work in our industry and go home at night, where they have diversity of opportunity regardless of their sex or their colour. Those are givens. They must be givens in a civilised society, as is a decent built environment which celebrates the way we live, and that we are social animals.
That's why we must make clear that actually this low carbon future isn't some freak show, where everybody has to dress differently and behave differently, live in weird houses with things poking out,
and never go to work or not take a holiday.
They would, in fact, the majority of our built stock of 2050 already exists. 80% of it's already here, which means most of us are going to be living exactly in the homes that we're living in now, but those homes, without actually particularly wearing it on their sleeve, will be far more efficient, far more healthy.
But we're talking here, Nick,
well-designed,
about a couple of things, aren't we? One is a corporate responsibility, which has been mentioned. The other thing is politicians have got to find a way of making this case. How do they do it?
Well, there are three key ingredients in this. Firstly, the case has to be presented in terms that people understand and accept. And that is a question of science being presented in ways that people can say, this is absolutely irrefutable. There's no question this has to be done. Secondly, the regulatory framework which government sets has got to point the direction, but has not got to be unduly restrictive. It's
got to give
or
incentives.
prescriptive. It's got to incentivise, and it's not got to be seen as this is heavy hand of government. And thirdly, that leads on to the third thing, the public have to see real advantages and benefits.
Are we going to get there?
Oh, I think we will, because we've talked about the positive aspects. It is quite interesting to think what will happen if we don't. And you're talking about a mass migration and social issues which beg a belief. I mean, it is simply inconceivable that mankind could be that stupid.
Mark Clare?
Well, we have no choice, which is quite helpful, and we will get there.
Sunan Prasad, last word.
It'll be a better world. It's not just a question of doing some glum duty, but actually this is an adventure. It'll trigger innovation and better futures for us.
Copenhagen or no Copenhagen. Sunan Prasad, Nick Rainsford, Mark Clare and Keith Clark, thank you all very much.